The struggle for power and control of resources and territories in Africa has given birth to a number of warlords in the last 50 years or more. One of such warlords is Bosco Ntaganda, popularly called the Terminator. In this edition of Back in History, we present to you the story of Bosco Ntaganda, who fought in the armies of two different countries and also fought as a rebel in the two countries. Welcome to this edition of Back in History. Bosco Ntaganda was born on November 5, 1973. He was born in Rwanda. He grew up in Rwanda. He started school in Rwanda but had to abandon it along the way. He is of the Tutsi tribe. The ethnic rivalry between the Hutu and Tutsi tribes of Rwanda has been a recurring decimal in history, and while Bosco Ntaganda was growing up in his native country of Rwanda, the rivalry and the attacks were still prevalent. Bosco thus grew up in an atmosphere of ethnic violence and toxic intertribal relationships. As a teenager, he fled the country with his family across the border into the Democratic Republic of Congo at the height of the attacks against his tribe. Bosco Ntaganda may have been radicalized by the experiences he had while growing up, but on his own, he also went the extra miles in his bid to fight ethnicity and later used arms for other purposes. He soon became a force to reckon with when it comes to guerrilla fights, an exhibition of raw force, and in no time, he expanded his scope into the struggle and fight for the control of mineral resources. Ntaganda took up arms at the age of 17. He fought with strength and vigor and left indelible trails in his fights. He alternated between being a rebel fighter and being a duly enlisted soldier in his native country of Rwanda and in the DR Congo, where he first fled to as a child and later adopted as his second home. As a rebel, he was both a fighter and a commander. He began his fighting when he joined forces with his fellows to resist the Hutu fighters in Rwanda. Ntaganda fought under the command and control of current president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, who was the leader of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, fighting to end the 1994 genocidal attacks against the Tutsis. The genocide eventually ended, but the unrest in Rwanda spilled over into neighboring DR Congo, where most Rwandese, particularly the Hutus, had fled to. Ntaganda, to the surprise of his fellow combatants in Rwanda, later flipped over from Rwanda and began to fight for DR Congo. There at DR Congo, Ntaganda joined Thomas Lubanga's rebel group known as UPC, that is, Union of Congolese Patriots. Almost immediately after joining the rebel group, Ntaganda was made the deputy chief of general staff to the UPC leader, Thomas Lubanga. The UPC was into serious fighting in the Ituri region of the DR Congo from 1999 to 2005. The UPC was a thorn in the flesh in Ituri, and the group was accused of mass killings and serious human rights violations, and Bosco Ntaganda was one of the persons accused of the series of violations. Those that knew him closely began to call him the Terminator because of his penchant for brutality. He was brave, daring, and brutal. Ituri region is rich in minerals, and a rebellion in the region was funded with money made from the extraction of the minerals. In 2006, Ntaganda became the military chief of staff of the National Congress for the Defense of the People, a Tutsi-led rebel group in North Kivu in the DR Congo, which was backed by Rwanda. Serious massacres were committed in the region, and the government of the DR Congo was disturbed by the happenings thereat. It should be noted that the fighting that went on in the DR Congo with Bosco Ntaganda and his men were carried out largely against Hutu groups in DR Congo. It was more of a spillover war from their home country of Rwanda and a continuation of the perennial war between the Hutus and the Tutsis, though in the process of the wars, citizens of DR Congo were equally affected in the crossfire. Government then sought ways of dialogue between the warring groups in the area. In early 2009, an agreement was reached between the government of Rwanda and that of the DR Congo, and Ntaganda and his co-fighters were integrated into the Congolese army, and Ntaganda was made a general as part of the peace deal. Ntaganda enjoyed a number of privileges in the Congolese army as a general. He was offered the best of accommodation and driven around in bulletproof vehicles. While in the Congolese army, Ntaganda was also accused of murder and other human rights violations. Ntaganda appears not to have had his satisfaction in the former military setup, and in April 2012, he left the Congolese army and formed the M23 rebel movement along with 300 of his loyalists. The group was based in the eastern region of the DR Congo and operated mainly around the borders between DR Congo, Uganda, and Rwanda. Its rebellion intensified heavily in 2012 and 2013 and led to the displacement of a large number of people. In November 2012, the M23 group took control of Goma. The group became a thorn in the flesh and source of concern and worry to the government of the DR Congo and to the international human rights community, as various cases of human rights abuses were recorded. In the middle of this fight was the struggle for the control of mineral resources by the rebel fighters. As noted earlier, DR Congo is one of the countries in the world with the largest deposits of much sought-after mineral resources. The number of casualties increased by the day, and the situation became more worrisome. It got to a point that President Joseph Kabila of the DR Congo called for the arrest of Ntaganda after all discreet efforts on his part for a ceasefire had failed, and after his efforts to reach a truce with Ntaganda and his group had also failed. At this time, the International Criminal Court had already declared Ntaganda wanted. At its pre-trial chamber, the International Criminal Court held that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Bosco Ntaganda bore individual responsibility for war crimes and thus issued an arrest warrant against him. He was accused of enlisting and conscripting children into his rebel group. He was also accused of rape, murder, and other forms of war crimes. For 7 years, Bosco Ntaganda could not be arrested. He went about his rebellion and continued to hold sway in his enclaves. He remained evasive and intractable. No one dared to forcefully arrest him for fear of reprisal attacks from his boys, who were mostly armed to the teeth and extremely deadly. On March 18, 2013, Bosco Ntaganda voluntarily handed over himself to the American embassy in Kigali, Rwanda, to the surprise of many. At the embassy, he requested that he should be transferred to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Bosco Ntaganda was transferred to The Hague, and on March 22, 2013, he was detained at the court. On March 23, 2013, he made his first appearance before the court. The charges against him were read to him, and in his reaction, he denied committing the offenses. The charges included rape, murder, sexual slavery, and recruitment of child soldiers. Ntaganda maintained that he was innocent of all the charges. He maintained further that the charges were orchestrated against him. Ntaganda's trial, which was expected to last for a few months, ended up lasting for years. He arrived to the court in March 2013, and his trial proper started in September 2015 and continued till July 2019, when the verdict of the court against him was read. Several witnesses, including former child soldiers of Ntaganda's Patriotic Forces for the Liberation of Congo (FPLC), were invited to testify at the trial. Ntaganda maintained that he was innocent of the charges. His trial was widely reported across the world, with journalists from several media houses filling the courtroom to the brim at every date of his trial. On July 8, 2019, Bosco Ntaganda was convicted of all 18 counts by the International Criminal Court. Bosco had to wait for another 3 months to know the sentence against him. On November 7, 2019, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This was the longest sentence to be handed down by the court in the entire stretch of its history. Dissatisfied with the verdict, Ntaganda appealed against the verdict, but on March 30, 2021, the appeal chambers of the International Criminal Court rejected the appeal and affirmed the decision of the trial chambers, which pronounced a sentence of 30 years against Ntaganda. At the time of the making of this video, Bosco Ntaganda has only served 3 years of his 30-year jail term. Having been born in 1973, he will be 78 years old by the time he will serve out his prison term. The name Bosco Ntaganda means different things to different people. For his tribesmen and his admirers, Bosco risked his life for them in the fight for the liberation of the Tutsis from Hutu militia. Bosco is thus seen as a hero, a freedom fighter, and a philanthropist who gave so much of his wealth to the poor people and the people in need whom he came in contact with. He is for them a celebrated hero. But for other persons, Bosco Ntaganda was a thorn in the flesh in his active days of rebellion. He was the real terminator and terror personified. For the International Criminal Court and the international human rights community as a whole, Bosco Ntaganda deserves the prison term handed down to him. But for Bosco himself, none of the allegations against him had been proved. The story of Bosco Ntaganda is a complex story on all dimensions. Indeed, the history of armed rebellion in Africa will not be complete without the mention of the name Bosco Ntaganda. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host Ekeme Nudim, wishing you the best of time as you continue to accompany me on the journey for the documentation of the history of Africa.